Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hidden Conversations. I'm joined today by SU Sleet, who, as some of you eagle-eyed participants may have noticed, is my mother. Sue has been, well, in fact, I'll let you introduce yourself. As most other participants in our series introduce themselves. So let everybody know a bit about your background and the kind of journey that you've been on to get you to this hot seat.
Well, welcome home to Fife. I started my working life at 17 as a police cadet, went on to be a Metropolitan policewoman until I got beaten up. So I gave that up, didn't like being beaten up.
That was on job?
That was on job.
Okay.
Took a long time to get over the injury, and then had probably one of the best events of my life in 1975.
What? Shh. Moving on.
So I was a stay-at-home mum with you and then your sisters who followed. From there, I became a foster carer, and over about 9 years, we had something like 90 children, plus you three.
That's foster children. Let's just clarify that it was 90 plus foster children,
plus you three,
plus us, and that over sort of 9-10 years kind of period when at the time fostering wasn't kind of stabilised, really, was it? It was very much ad hoc. It
was very ad hoc. There was very little training for foster carers at that point, and in fact at that time they actually masked some of the difficulties that foster carers encounter. So you were going into it green and blind.
Yeah. Okay, so through foster care and then
social work training.
Okay.
Which I did at Richmond, or St Margaret's, the college actually was. I did the CQSW, certification and qualification, and a diploma in social work, which is a very different course to the current now.
So how long were you in professional social care?
31 years.
Okay. Didn't want to push for the 35 then?
No.
So in that time, as kind of you've kind of seen all of the changes that have gone through in 3 decades, everything else, is probably kind of then the development of Hive Group and then obviously then supporting with that. So the reason for today's hidden conversation is we want to explore what the relationship between the therapeutic world and certainly the children's social care arena is like, and what kind of things are we kind of almost missing out on, because the two worlds that really can benefit both are quite often separated.
Very much.
And in conversations that we've had over the years, and I know other professionals out there have had, it's almost a kind of, I don't know what their social care wants from the therapeutic arena, but also a lot of social care professionals not having the awareness about the therapeutic process And certainly
Yeah.
in the coaching arena, the idea of coaching within social care is
Doesn't
almost
exist.
non-existent in the UK. So in the experience that you've had over the last 3 decades, would you say there has been growth in those two arenas, or do you think it's got worse over the 3 decades?
I think generally it's got worse.
Mhm.
I think part of that is the financial restraints local authorities have. I can remember very early on in my career being given permission to go and find a private therapist for a child in care. The last 15 years of my career didn't happen. They go to CAMS. If CAMS don't accept them, it doesn't happen. Or they're moved because their behaviour is so disruptive from whatever environment they're in to what's known as a specialist therapeutic community, who may or may not actually have therapy on site. And again, that's very ad hoc.
So when we look at the kind of relationship between the two communities, do you think there is a bridge that can be reached?
I think there is a bridge. It's possibly going to come from people within the therapeutic network who work in schools, because they will be the ones hearing what's going on and may even be the ones hearing the disclosures and having to report it. I think the difficulty with that is a lot of social workers, especially the newer ones, and I don't want to put them down, but the training is so different now. They don't even have the skills that I had as a new social worker to understand systemic family therapy. It's just not taught on the courses anymore.
Do you think that has been in part because the therapeutic dynamic has been seen within systems as that's the therapeutic community, that's not our place to be?
Yeah, I also think that social work, certainly over the last 10 years, has been much less of the social worker working with the family as the social worker farming out work. So you will have charities who will offer to do mediation between families or one-to-one work.
It's almost a case of kind of managing the environment rather than working with to grow from the inside. And for the therapeutic community, that understanding of the need for the work to come from inside rather than from outside is something that is well and truly known. And I think a lot of the frustrations the therapeutic community express about child social care is that it's almost seen as that's not your space. This is our space, that's your space, never the twain should meet.
And we know there's a lot of judgment in social workers these days. So you can get situations that are quite toxic between social workers and therapists, especially around issues of confidentiality. But also, I'm the social worker, I know my client, where in fact what they've done is tick box
Mm.
what the management require.
Mm. Do you think a lot of the perception around child social care and the engagement with the therapeutic community, and I include coaches in that, is very much led by the outcomes of special case reviews, or do you think it is more to do with the financial operational needs on a more day-to-day basis?
Interesting question. The financial stuff on a day-to-day basis is really severely tight, especially at the moment. To the point where some social workers are buying their own notepads because they can't get a notepad from the office. But the case reviews, and I've probably read hundreds over the last 30 years. I've been involved in some of them. But the outcomes for case reviews are not focused on clients.
So almost seems that it's the system protection rather than the outcome for
the child
for that particular case.
And I think that's happened because that particular case is now closed because that child has died. You know, they're the most serious of the serious case reviews. And it doesn't look at, it'll look at what went wrong in that case and what went right, but it will then say, well, this hasn't been logged, that hasn't been logged. So everybody changes their system to make sure A to Z is now logged. And it's all on computer. The forms are multiple written because you have, for social workers, it's one computer file per child. And you can't always cut and paste from one child to the other. And
the system technology and everything else is different across local authorities right across the country. One of the things that I kind of wanted us to touch on was that where we've seen case review after case review after case review, and as you say, it very much becomes a system protection. How do we make sure the system's done everything that it needs to do? When we look at the case that brought that review, invariably the outcome in that case would not change if the outcome of the review had been put in place for that case. So are we at risk now with a system that is so overstretched? As you say, professionals are having to kind of purchase their own professional equipment, etc. Where carers are feeling, I can't cope with the behaviours of the young people involved, and I have to protect my family, so I'm pulling out. So, which just further stretches the resources available. Are we looking at a situation, do you think, where the psychological impact on professionals, on carers, on young people, as well as the trainees that are desperate to get in and support and make a difference, have we created a situation where the best support is outside the system?
I think we're heading that way. I think the best support for a social worker should be their peer group and their immediate supervisors. And sometimes, and I did it at times through my career, you find somebody outside of that who can mentor you. And I do mentoring for social workers in different parts of the world. But I don't think we're far off from where it's going to implode. And I think with COVID, there's been a drop in referrals. I was listening to the director of Kent the other day. Something like 70 to 80% drop in referral rates over the same period last year, because the young people aren't in school.
Do you think that sorry,
can I just finish that? I think the other thing that is going to impinge is it's been reported 21% of social workers have resigned and left the profession in the last 6 months.
And that's what I was coming to.
Yeah.
Do you think the systemic self-defense, the survival mode of the system, has reached that point where, as you say, 21% drop in professional activity and resources, and that's just professional social workers. We're not talking about those that have come out from training. We're not talking about those that have stepped out from the support and the auxiliary roles. We're just looking at qualified social workers that have stepped away. But neither are we including in that the foster carers that have gone enough and stepped out. So there's a stark lack of support within that.
And I think part of that lack of support now is a lot of the more experienced social workers have come up to past and now left, have retired, you know, they're my age group. And those stepping up into those roles are less experienced. They only have to be a team manager now. You only have to be qualified 2 to 3 years in most authorities.
Do you think, and I want to kind of get to kind of the therapeutic side in a second, but do you think that the system, the career progression, development, the training sequencing, the on-job support system, the supervision within the system, all of these things have now been shown collectively to be part of the perfect storm of what we've got. There isn't one of those things, if you were to fix one, that would fix the situation. It's now got to a point where there is a perfect storm within social care. Okay, so given that, how important do you believe the therapeutic support for those professionals, those carers that are left in that system has become?
Vital. I don't think they get it. They're not encouraged to get it. And if you're seen to have a weakness that you need therapy for, depends on the situation. If you've been assaulted at work, as I was offered in-house counselling. On one occasion that was through CAMS, which was quite difficult because it was a very big thing that affected all of us. But I also worked with CAMS, so that was quite difficult to manage.
And that creates a conflict of interest. It creates questions around confidentiality. Even if there's there's not a practical conflict.
Yeah.
It's that perception and the reassurance
Yeah.
that conflict is manageable, etc. Do you think and again it comes onto the reliance within the system.
Yeah.
In-house counselling, working with professionals that you're already working with.
Yeah.
It is something that actually damages the overall support mechanism for the professional.
It does, because certainly in my case, even though the reasons I were there was because the client, that client was well known, it meant I felt I couldn't open up. And so I didn't get all the benefits.
And this is where I think the therapeutic community really can gauge a huge benefit by opening up to those professionals.
Yeah.
As independent.
In the same way as APRA's opened up to NHS and social care workers. I think that will come, but it's almost as if the social worker's got to get to the point of, I've got to get out of here, and then they seek the support.
And there isn't really that safety net in the role as the system stands.
There is a safety net. You have to ask to be referred through occupational health.
Do you think
but
that
it is put on your record in HR?
That creates a fear factor, it must do.
Yeah.
And
you don't know who you're being referred to, and you get no choice.
And this is where I think APA's approach that came up from the collaboration with professions for the NHS and social care workers of having that bursary, that the professional is registered with the bursary, and you can choose from that directory, is something that certainly APA is hopeful will extend across to
that would
local
be
authorities.
Ideal. There was one instance where I had a minor assault, but police were involved and the person was arrested, and I was not even given a choice. I was told the referral had been made by my boss. I might at that point have gone to an outside therapist. I suppose I was lucky I had very good peer support, but the therapist I went to was a life coach and wasn't interested in the impact of what had happened.
And there is that kind of stark disconnect.
Yeah.
That we, at Apple, we've seen it time and time again, and I'm sure therapeutic professionals, both coaches and counsellors and psychotherapists, will all testify that there is this misunderstanding about
who can do
what, etc. And in part, the therapeutic environment has not made that easy for the social care arena.
Yeah.
But the social care arena itself has its own part to play in that relationship.
Very much it has a part. And I think when they changed the course to a degree course, and whilst I appreciate they got an extra year of college-based training, which is, to an extent, you can say is always useful, but they took out a lot of what had been in the previous course. The other thing they did was say, as soon as you've finished, you can apply to be a social worker.
And it's that I think that kind of lends itself as, you know, that's the kickstart to an awful lot of kind of fruit from the poison tree, if you like.
Yeah.
And you know, we can banter and we have done over the years about kind of what that looks like, what it should be, etc.
Yeah.
The therapeutic community, whose sole purpose is to provide the framework for those individuals to achieve what they want to achieve and manage whatever has gone before, and the emotional turmoil and trauma that kind of comes up in those individuals' lives. When we're talking about the trauma and the experience of social care professionals, my gut instinct is that we misunderstand the secondary trauma and the impacts on, well, certainly within social care, that is missed. It's almost, it's part of the job, you deal with it.
Thrown around, but yeah, it's part of the job. What are you cringing about? I was probably quite rare as a manager in that I'd had very good practice teachers at the beginning of my career who would debrief me. I spoke to a support worker a few weeks ago and I said, so who debriefed you? And she went, no one. You're not here.
And you've managed teams across the country. Yeah. You mentor internationally. You've been through some of the worst public cases, or been involved in some of the cleanup. As you know, I put that cleanup in inverted commas. And it is a case of how do we recover and not make the situation worse for the other 500 cases in this office. We've seen caseloads go through the roof. We've seen the reach out to therapeutic professionals almost disappear completely. As you said, 15 years ago, if you need a therapist, go and find a therapist for this family, whatever it might be, and we make sure that it happens. That isn't all but gone. For the therapeutic community, looking at a situation where it's almost the backbone of avoiding problems into the future. With wait lists, what they are for third sector support, the work that, as you've already said, being done to kind of cope with all of that being taken away. Do you think there is lessons to be learned within the social care arena from the therapeutic arena around things like supervision and mentoring? And
I think there is. And all the people I mentor, I mentor in Australia, the Cayman Isles, England, and Wales.
And it's worth pointing out the systems within all of those places you mentioned differ. And having the flexibility to be able to provide that service and that support kind of lends itself to what a lot of professionals miss out when there is so many differences within the sector.
And even going from one local authority in London to another one in London, you have to be aware of differences, even though they all work within the framework of the Pan-London guidelines.
Just as
they're all very different.
And just as an example, bearing in mind, so children's social care is regulated, it is managed, there is a kind of core framework in place. But local authorities will have their own variation and their own interpretation. And the therapeutic community desperately sees the outcome. Desperately sees it. And when I say that, it's quite often the therapeutic professional that sees somebody in their 20s after they've gone through that final psychological lockdown, where a lot of things will emerge that were never disclosed while somebody was, for want of a better phrase, in care. And as you know, it's a phrase that I don't believe you can call whatever happens in social care as being in care. And even the phrase "looked after," when we see the outcomes, if that's not looked after.
There's a lot within social care, and there has been historically as well, where people rescue. So you have a child in the community, things are going very badly, whether it's neglect, physical abuse, whatever, and they go and rescue them and they put them into foster care. And then they hand over to people who are very willing, some with great skills, some with less, who take these children in, treat them supposedly as their, in quote, family. And the social worker doesn't have very much to do unless there's a problem, or they need a holiday grant, or they need this. But these children need more. They need their emotional supports. They're often taken out of their schools. Their contact with their reality, however bad it was, is disrupted. And there is no support for that child to come to terms with the new environment. So I can remember.
It's almost re-traumatizing, isn't it?
It is. And I probably wouldn't have thought that 30 years ago. But I worked with a couple of boys who went from a very poor foster placement to residential and then back to foster care. And I was getting lots of complaints about this boy not listening and all the rest. And one of the examples, and it is about communication, and it's vital for these children. The example was, we came home from church and I told him to change his pants. And he took his underwear off, but he put his pants back on. In the care home, the underwear was called pants. The pants that she was talking about were trousers. But she hadn't sat down with him and actually explained the different terminology in her home.
And it creates that, again, there is more difference, there is, and we've seen it throughout our time connected to social care. You've obviously done it for longer than I have. Unfortunately, I wasn't there right at the beginning. But the process for the social care sector, when it connects to the therapeutic arena, on those rare occasions, invariably it's historic, because it's now a young adult that's realise that actually they need to process what happened
What's
when they were in
happened.
care.
Yeah.
And a disclosure happens. And it's one of the things that therapists and counsellors and coaches very rarely have any experience or any information on what happens next.
Yeah.
And in a few of the examples that have come across APA's desk over the last year, the advice has generally been contact the social care department that they were connected to and make, support the individual if that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
And we've seen how that's backfired because obviously the protocols that are in place and the self-defense that then goes in. So as someone that provides support to professionals working in and around social care, what would your advice be to somebody who receives that disclosure in a therapeutic setting in order to make sure that what the individual wants can be achieved longer term?
Yeah. If it's an adult, I wouldn't go to social care. Even if it happened in foster care. And sometimes, I've worked with young people who've been abused at home and then had the same abuse in the foster placement. And it's horrific working with them.
Just when you say the abuse has happened in placement, invariably the abuse continues while they are in foster placement. It's not that the abuse happens because it's not the carers or
I'm talking about when it is the carers.
Okay.
And yes, abuse within the family can continue if there's unsupervised contact. There can be threats made by turning up to contact with a teddy bear, and that tells the young person, don't you say anything. And that can happen, or used to happen in court, where they'd suddenly pick up a teddy bear from the dock and put it on the front of the dock. The young person
knew what that meant. Yeah. And this is something that I know CAFCAS has worked really hard at making sure that the court arena remains as safe as is physically possible. But we know those subliminal grooming goes on and everything else. So a young adult who's been through the care system discloses in a therapeutic setting that they've been through while they were in care. The abuse continued while they were supported. The go-to is support the claim. And
always.
Must always remain as support the claim. If the client wants to pursue a case against that local authority or the abuser in their history, the local authority, as you say, is not the place to go. What should happen?
You go to the place. Because
the client goes to the police.
The client goes to the police with the therapist support, and makes the allegation.
When you say makes the allegation, the disclosure's happened in therapy.
But
the concern
they have to repeat that
to the police directly. And that's my point, is the perception is quite often the accusation is made in the therapy room. That's where the process starts. And because of that, a lot of things can then go right, can't they? So while the disclosure is made, the support is given, the decision is made to pursue, what information, once disclosure is made to the police, should the therapist be aware that they're now part of that process?
Very much so. And what I'd say to any therapist is, if you have a disclosure made make sure you write I can never say it,
contemplatory
notes, because the police will want them. Even if you don't write down anything in your session, you write it down immediately afterwards, and put the date and time of the session and the time the notes were written.
Do you think that within that kind of note taking, as you say, it's the contemplate in response to, rather
the
than
immediate notes.
right? It's that, right, I've contemplated what's been said. This is the information that has come through. Do you think that there is a fear among both the social care sector, but also among the therapeutic sector, about those notes and confidentiality and everything else? Is that fear justified? And if so, how does the solution look?
I think on one level, the fear is the fear of the unknown. In social care, your records are X. Your handwritten records are kept for 7 years, even before you put it on the computer. They're held for 75 years on the computer.
And that will be a fear factor for an awful lot of therapeutic professionals who are ethically working to, I have to maintain the confidentiality of my claim, I have to maintain the confidentiality of the session, I have to maintain the confidentiality of the context of what's being said, and why the potential for that disclosure is at that moment in time. Because they're working with, a lot of different dynamics in play. Whereas when social care look at, there's been a disclosure, they want to pinpoint the disclosure, and the kind of moving the relationship closer together. I think awareness about what needs to be in those notes needs to be maybe a bit clearer.
Okay. Once the police get involved and take it up, they will hold a meeting which may or may not include the therapist.
Do you think it should?
If the therapist had the disclosure, yes.
Okay.
But it would include someone from children's safeguarding, probably be chaired by them.
Even though that we're now dealing with an adult that has left the care
because
system.
it's about the foster placement. And that meeting isn't so much about the allegation. It's about what evidence is there, what can we find out about who she made or he made those allegations about. Have we got a file on them? Were they foster carers in our area? Even though she is a child of our area, foster carers could be from another borough. They could be from a private agency.
So it's kind of information gathering.
It's information gathering, and then the police will normally take the lead. They will talk to the therapist about what they can and can't say once the police decide they're taking action, because quite often the police will say, you can't have therapy whilst this is going through
And
the court
that's a
system.
major concern
Yeah.
for every therapeutic professional
Right.
that gets caught in this situation.
Yeah.
Because
But
ultimately,
it's not true. You can carry on therapy, but there's certain specific guidance, and we can get hold of those and give them to APA members who need it. I wouldn't say it's something we broadcast to everybody,
No.
but through the social care navigator, we can
Yeah,
help through that.
and it's worth mentioning the social care navigator at this point. The whole process of engaging with social care is not something that's included in most training in any way, shape or form, other than there is social care. You may have to engage with them at some point. And the social care navigators are part of ANA's support network. So anyone who is in this scenario, dealing with social care, dealing with historic abuse, dealing with live abuse in some cases that is connected to social care, you can reach out and you can get support. It is something that ANA subsidises. It's not a free service. And unfortunately, because of various different factors currently, that is the situation that APA is in with social care navigators.
Yeah.
And I think for the time being, I think that's actually the right approach, because once you get into once you get into making it free service, you're
inundated.
in. Not only are you inundated, but you're also then in potential conflict of interest about the information that's been shared.
Yeah.
So the idea of reaching out when that situation comes isn't, and it has to be clear, it is not taking away from supervision within the therapeutic sector.
Yeah.
This is additional support, and it is guidance about whatever has come up. So there is no conflict of confidentiality, because you don't need to have the discussion about who, where, when, how, why. It's about the process of taking the information through the system in a way that makes sure the therapist has the knowledge, so they're not blindsided by a system that's in self-defense mode. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
And I think sometimes that knowledge is very small things. Something like we had recently where a referral was made and they hadn't said the child was aware of the referral. Now, if you're working with children or adults, parents, and you're worried about abuse, which is different from historic abuse, and you feel you need to make the referral, you do that to social care. But if you don't tell them the child's aware of it, the timeframes that they must work within are longer. Okay. So they have, you must do this within X, you must get a manager's agreement in Y, but they don't have to go out as quickly.
Because is that because the disclosure's already been made, and therefore it's information starting? What's the reasoning behind that?
Because they then have time to gather from the wider multi-agency.
Mm-hmm. Multi-agency, just for those that don't know what that means, multiple disciplines that have connection to a child coming together.
It will be any information the police hold, which could be part of a risk assessment for going out. any information a health visitor, school nurse, adult services have on the family.
So it's the collation of information that's held in and around a particular individual or a particular family.
Yeah.
Okay, so the process for the therapeutic professional is really to understand what they should be aware of if their client decides that they are going to pursue a case after having made the disclosure, rather than the therapist, unless it is a child who is in danger.
At risk. Yeah.
There are different paths to take in those scenarios. Okay,
but
so
if it's a child who's telling you something and is old enough, I'm not talking about the babies, because again, the age of the child would be reflective in how quickly local authorities respond. But if, say, you're working with an 11 or 12-year-old and what she's telling you, she may not see as a disclosure, probably wouldn't even understand the language that we're using today, but you tell her that you have a duty to report this to get her more support or him more support. That changes the time frame to 24 hours to go out and do a visit.
So that's when it's live disclosure, it's happening, or the risk is, or the perception of risk is that there is a danger, and therefore the escalation has to come up. When it's historic, it can take longer.
It can take longer. But if it's, say it's severe neglect you're dealing with, that might not be seen as something to rush out as if there's a fire. Same with sexual abuse. You don't rush out, you plan and collate. But if the child is aware, that child is living on the fear that someone's going to come and knock on the door and somebody in that house is going to erupt.
And that's
you can't leave that child in that emotional state.
And this is where I think a lot of the conflict, and I think that's where there's an awful lot of kind of hesitation, and it's why this kind of conversation is a hidden conversation. I think if this was widely spoken about, I think a lot of the myths and a lot of the misunderstandings would be dispelled very, very quickly. But the fear factor of working with a client in that situation where, as a professional, you can be called to court becomes a real kind of fear factor for the professional therapist. And it's one of the reasons why APA has made the recommendation that all working with child is done as a specialisation after qualifying, because worst case scenario, you work with a child pre-qualifying, in training, because that's the interest, and you have a disclosure that's not being picked up by any of the screenings, because we know it happens, and all of a sudden there's a professional or a trainee who may not be able to get their own supervision, get their own advice within an hour of that disclosure. And as you say, if it's live, the timeline to actually work on that is 24 hours. And most professionals don't appreciate that. Most professionals don't understand, because it's not given to them.
It's not public.
And therefore, when they get the advice a week later, or they processed it themselves, and they then go, right, okay, what do I do with this? That clock stopped running already.
Yeah.
And when it started again, it allows a defence barrister the opportunity to say, well, process wasn't followed here.
Yeah.
And people walk away
Yeah.
before they even get in front of them.
And sometimes the family have moved. I can think of cases where, even as a social worker, I've gone out and done a visit, got back as I was instructed as a fairly green stick 40-year-old social worker, and being told, well, we need to do X, Y, and Z. By the time we'd done that, we went back to the family with the police, and the family had moved. It can be as quick as 2-3 hours. So if you wait 7 days, dependent on the family's circumstances, they may be questioning the child. Well, what did you say in therapy? What did you this? What did you that? And the child breaks down. I don't know how they do it, but families can up and move in 4 hours.
And when you're in a, when that environment is set and it's practiced and we've seen it over the years. And
then you've got a missing family who may be on child protection plan anyway, or is going to be put on one because they're now missing.
Do you find that jurisdiction overlap is a factor within the UK now?
Yeah.
So that relocation into a different area, a new school, time lags everything else, and it just keeps. And when we saw figures,
might not go into school when they first moved.
And we saw figures released this week of 100,000 children go missing from within the system every year. They're not disappearing. They're not, there isn't a spaceship that's coming around and kind of hoovering them up. It is simply that relocation within the system that, they then register in a local area because they don't go into a school, whatever.
Some of it is that. Some of it is children walking out of care homes, children walking out of foster care.
And that goes back. I mean, I'm kind of reminded. I'm kind of reminded of a very famous world champion boxer who, at 15, was in the care profession, and someone who walked out from his care home the Friday before he was due to be relocated to our home, and he disappeared from the system for, I think it was about 4 or 5 months, and it wasn't until he was in the boxing gym that he was able to kind of get with the support team and go on and become a very, very successful. I don't think it'll say that he didn't have a hard time, but that's one example where someone actually gets the right support outside of the system and turns their life around. And we
know the benefits agency will say children in care, invariably they are not on an even employment lane, if you like, until they're 27, when they've worked through all their own issues.
And DWP a couple of years ago said it takes 7 years from leaving care as an average. So we know that the system is having a really tough time. We know that COVID has had a massive impact on social care and the young people that are involved in it. We know that the support for the social care professionals and the therapeutic professionals is very, very slight. And we know that APA is kind of conscious of that and doing what APA can to provide that, reinforce that safety net as much as is physically possible. We've already kind of touched on what the professionals need to know about receiving live disclosure and historic disclosures. And just having that information, I think, isn't about the professional making the disclosure. It's about having the awareness so they can support their client if their client chooses that that's the route they want to take. We've also kind of touched on why it's so specialised, and I've always said working with children is a bit like brain surgery, right? Because if you're going
training into brain surgery,
you would rather have somebody cut you open and play with your brain who's already qualified as a doctor and then started to look at brain surgery rather than someone that's in their third year or second year of medical school who's still working out where to put the cut.
One of the reasons why I think social care is heading for that collapse is frontline social work. So the ones coming in doing the initial and first complex assessments are quite often no more than 21 or 22 years of age.
It's very easy to be blinded by the presentation, isn't it?
Very easy to be blinded by it. No life experience. They might have gone off to college, but very little above that.
Do you think there is a lag in the wider kind of skill sets? And what I mean by that is we've seen in recent years the police, as an example, have said you cannot now apply to be a police officer unless you have done X amount of time as a PCSO and built up your knowledge of area, policing operations, etc. Do you think there is scope for that kind of support stepping stone for social care?
Yeah, and it used to be there. When I qualified, the earliest I could have qualified, the earliest I could have been accepted in college was 25 years old.
That in itself changes the dynamic.
Exactly.
Completely.
And I was in my late 30s. I'd been a police officer, which was held against me in those days. I'd done community relations. I'd been a foster carer. I'd done pastoral work within the church. I'd run Sunday school. I had an A4 sheet of voluntary work that I'd done prior to going to college. And I was questioned on every bit of that. And some of it was pulled apart, and within college, some of it was pulled apart, and you accepted it and you learned from it and moved on.
Does it not highlight that we've, in moving to an academic base for any environment, we've taken away the vocational kind of building blocks?
We have, and part of the thing, if you didn't take the route I took with voluntary work, you had to have worked with either children or adults or in the criminal justice section, dependent
which specialisation.
station
And again,
you
it comes down
wanted.
to that specialisation, doesn't
Yeah.
it? So, wanting to kind of wrap up the hidden conversation, and kind of bring it to the benefit for the therapeutic sector. Do you think that by having those awarenesses within the therapeutic setting about timelines once a disclosure is made in the therapeutic setting, so the information can then be relayed to a client in the event that they make a disclosure, is better than waiting until a disclosure is made and then going, right, what do I need to do here?
Yeah, I think some basic knowledge. I don't think therapists need to know, although some will want to, every tick box social workers or the police have to go through in those situations. But I do think the basic knowledge, when you make a referral, how do you gauge the seriousness of it? And
when you say when you make a referral, are we it? Because my understanding is the only time a therapeutic professional would be in that situation is if they are working with a minor, and the minor has made a disclosure
of a minor.
Right. Okay.
You may be working with a mother who is talking about domestic violence and her fears for her children. You may then talk to her about getting support. You may be looking at how do you help her to plan how she leaves the family, where the seriousness is escalating. How do you as a therapist understand that escalation?
And it's quite telling, because the amount of information that's available is vast. And I know that you've spoken, as I have, with Caroline Flynn at MAP, and the resources that are available. They are absolutely phenomenal. And if
I wish I'd had those.
And if anyone hasn't checked out MAP, please go take a look. QR code resources that mean you can get accurate information about where you need to signpost for thousands of pieces of information. It's absolutely phenomenal. But that ability to have the awareness in your back pocket as a therapeutic professional, as a coach, has to be something that I think is safer for the client than not having. Do you think that, in light of, as you said, the downturn in referrals, because the school arena is kind of not able to kind of interact and not, if you like, be a set of eyes in the safety zone?
Yeah, when the schools open in September, Kent County Council predict, now they're the biggest social care area, they're bigger than Greater London. They predict on having 250 referrals a week that will need removals.
And that's frightening.
Yeah, terrifying.
When we have a 21% drop in professionals that are qualified to be involved in those
assessments.
Assessments. But also when you've got the downturn in places for young people to go to. But as we've already said, the emotional support and the psychological well-being, which is quite often the abandoned component, which leads, as we know, to that emotional support being provided by negative influences. We know that psychological void becomes filled with anger, fear, violence, etc.
And it also leaves young people to be incredibly vulnerable to groomers, either online or in the street.
I wanted to touch before we close on something that I know is quite close to a lot of members' thoughts at the moment. I know there is a massive campaign around parental responsibility being undertaken both by cross-party support in Parliament and some of the survivors from Rotherham.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name all of them because it's one, I will miss somebody off, and I really don't want to. So, but the idea that an abuser who becomes a parent is convicted of the abuse, and invariably the mother, as in the case in Rotherham and around the country. Rotherham's not the only case where this applies.
It's happening all over.
It does happen all over, as you say.
Where
but the parental responsibility of the father who's been convicted of the abuse is maintained, and local authorities enforce the mother to ensure that contact continues. APA is and will, I am sure, have a formal response to the support of that campaign. But as a social care professional who's seen this rise and the kind of demand for parental responsibility to be observed above everything else, do you believe parental responsibility overrides the right of the child to be protected?
No. I've worked with a lot of cases where the court have made no contact orders in order to protect the rights of a child to life, where there has been a risk or where a child in the family has already died, which is one of the cases I dealt with where there was serious case review. And the thing with parental rights is they also have responsibilities that go along with them. And I think a lot of organisations forget that. So if you have a parental right, you have the responsibility to provide for that child, to emotionally keep the welfare of that child, to provide food, housing, etc. Even if you split up as, a married couple who split up, you do not, other than a mother, you do not, as a father, automatically have parental responsibility. The law changed at one time, if you weren't married, whether your name was on the birth certificate or not, you had no rights. I think that change was positive to a degree. Women still have the right to not put the name of their abuser on a child's birth certificate.
Do you think that in the scenario that is being discussed out in the wider world around this topic, that the option, and I'm only talking about options, for a judge to say the grooming that has gone on of the mother, the abuse that has created the child, and in a lot of the cases that are of public record, ongoing grooming, manipulation, and kind of power domination, that a judge should have the option to remove or a local authority, let's put it another way, the local authority should have the option to ask for a judge to have parental responsibility removed.
It's much more difficult to get it removed, especially if the person's named on the birth certificate. A lot of women who've been groomed are pressurised to put the name on the birth certificate.
And that, I think, is the side effect of what's happened in the past, isn't it?
But also, it's not just the local authority who can go to court. A parent who can explain, and they probably need a relatively good children's panel solicitor, can make a case for a no contact order on the basis that they were groomed, that the potential for the child to be groomed means the mother wishes to protect the child from what she's been through. They can also use case law by Lady Butler Sloss when she was president of the family division in the High Court, which talks about the fear of the mother being put back into a violent situation. And Butler Sloss was very good. She was a brilliant judge in how she worded things. And in a case called Reed J, I think it was, she talked about the mother, even if the mother is not at the contact, the fear for her child impacting on the child prior to, during, and immediately after contact. And that is why the various things she says has to happen.
Right. So for a therapeutic professional who's dealing with a mother who has experienced this, the information really has to be available for them to be able to understand what that environment looks like, or that support environment looks like. And again, the resources are there. It's just about not being blindsided.
It's also about not allowing, because for a lot of these young women who got children through abuse, sometimes through trafficking as well, not just grooming, is social care get involved because they're young parents and they want support. And they say things as truths and maybe put things in the child protection plan as truths. And the young woman, fearful for her child and fearful the child may be removed if she says no, is in a bind.
Do you think that that kind of cycle of fear is something that, because of the timelines involved in any of these kind of cases, and the urgency of protection for social care, is another one of those reasons why the therapeutic sector looks at that environment and goes, whoa, there is a real challenge here.
Yeah.
Do you think that understanding of the therapeutic sector saying, well, this is a challenge that we're not trained for, we don't have the knowledge for, etc., is understood by the social care sector?
No.
And okay, that kind of says it all. So in my mind, the fact that there is misunderstanding on both sides about what is required and what is available. There's
also the difficult to communicate it, but we know what we're doing by the social worker. You don't, you're just a do-gooder. Rather than saying, how can we work together?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge in any kind of multi-agency working or anything else. But I think with, as you say, the expected spike post-COVID of cases hitting the system, the downturn because in resources available. Now's really the opportunity for the therapeutic sector to be kind of stepping in and saying, we know that this is a minefield, but somebody's got to clear it. And we've got to get to a point where the young people that are going through this now are supported now, because it's going to be easier to deal with now, however hard and much of a nightmare it might be, but it's easier to deal with that now than it is to deal with it in 10 years' time, when it's had 10 years of growth and roots and the psychological lockdowns and everything else that come along with it. Thank you for your time, Joe. It is kind of weird, this. I hope you guys have enjoyed the conversation. I hope it's been insightful. I hope it's given you a sense that there is support there, that if you are working with anybody that's connected with the social care sector, either live, as in they are connected to it, or their family is connected to the social care sector right now, but also if you're working with somebody that has historic connections to the social care sector, there are things and information available to you that are going to enable you to give your client the best possible access to support. It's not all about you as the therapeutic professional or the social care professional doing absolutely everything. And by all means, the sense of growth that's required when we've got such a turn down in social care. If there is anybody that is interested in getting involved in the social care sector, now's the time to do it. It's needed more now than at probably any other time, even kind of post 1945. I think this is the time we really need the communities to come together, and with such a backdrop of COVID and everything else that's kind of been triggered in recent months, our young people need us now just as much as our NHS professionals need therapy. So for every therapeutic professional out there, please make yourself known to the commissioning teams of your local area. That way, at least the social care teams can get in touch where they need the support. Let them know you're there. Make it something that is viable for those social workers to reach out again. It has been in place in the past. It needs to be put back in place. But for now, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone that has watched. If there is anything in what you've seen on the video that you feel benefits your practice and you wish to get the CPD certificate for this session of Hidden Conversations, by all means, download the CPD questionnaire from the ANA website and get that into us to get that certificate. For now, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.